Okay, here's the question. Do you think it's more important to decide the process of getting to a destination without knowing the destination, or to know the destination and not know the process of getting there?
That is a fantastic question. So I think there's a really good quote that sort of sums this up from a mentor of mine, and he talks about ready, fire, aim. Okay. And so the whole idea of building products is to iterate very quickly, because you don't know what the market actually wants until you start doing some tests, right? So you start here and you jump over here and you do a test and you go, okay, you need to readjust and go here. So my answer to your question is definitely it's more about the process and being driven by feedback from the community and being very iterative on how you're building your product. So yeah, I think definitely you need to have like the vision to sort of, at a macro sense, like, yeah, we're going to get here, but you're only going to get there by doing these small iterative cycles. And you're only going to know that that is the correct destination if you make those discoveries along the way. So yeah, that's how I like to think about product development.
Welcome back to AlgoHQ. I'm here with Austin Wilshere, one of the founding members of the xBacked DAO project, stablecoin with vaults building on the Algorand blockchain. Welcome to the show, Austin.
Man, thanks for having me. It's good to talk and good to be here.
Yeah, great to have you here. So your project is on testnet right now, gearing up for that mainnet launch. Can you give a quick summary of xBacked for the audience if they're watching this for the first time and have never heard of the protocol?
Definitely. So xBacked is a overcollateralized, decentralized stablecoin. And what that means, instead of something like USDC or USDT, which has fiat dollars in a bank account that are backing each token, instead, the xUSD token, our stablecoin, is backed by crypto assets or ASAs on Algorand. So we're beginning with Algo and goBTC and goETH. And then over time, we'll expand as more solid ASAs and projects come to market. Yeah, that's the high level overview. And the idea is being over collateralized, there's always more dollar value backing xUSD than there is xUSD in circulation. And we can get into the specifics of that a little bit later.
Yeah, please.
And yeah, so that's kind of that's what we're building. So it's not, I wouldn't call it an algorithmic stablecoin. I would call something like Frax or UST closer to a true algorithmic stablecoin. We are a collateral backed stablecoin.
Gotcha. So before we get into like the details of how xBacked functions more, exclusively, how'd you get into blockchain? How'd you get into Algorand? Give us that rundown.
Oof. Good question. So I've been working at SaaS companies now for almost 5 years, which has been a super, super exciting journey. And I did a fintech incubator at an Australian bank. Super fun, learned a lot. Mostly learned I wasn't too excited about TradFi and what was going on. And so a friend of mine during university, he was super deep, like off the deep end in blockchain. Like back in 2017, he was working remotely for blockchain companies. So I was just like, that's crazy. It sounds fun, but at the time it just didn't interest me. And then after this incubator, I started like looking more into it and started realizing, like, since 2017, obviously a lot of things had come to fruition, like MakerDAO, synthetics, Aave, those sorts of protocols were coming out and gaining a lot of popularity. And the more I looked into it, I just sort of realized DeFi and Web3, I believe, is going to be a big trend in the next like 2 decades. And so I wanted to move from working on SaaS to working on Web3 and getting involved. And the way that came about is I was introduced to the guys at Meld Ventures. So they're based in Australia. And so a mutual connection connected us, and we went for coffee and we started just brainstorming ideas. And obviously they were big on Algorand. And I was like looking at Ethereum at the time, and I guess similar to John and Noah at AlgoHQ, as soon as I sort of looked at Algorand, I was like, oh, cool. There's really good technology, a very strong team behind it. And you could actually build smart contracts on it, which, there's some other L1s out there that you can't really do that, and you can't build rich applications.
Right.
And so that really piques my interest, especially as a product person. For me, it's all about building value for the community.
Mm-hmm.
And I just saw a lot of opportunity in Algorand to build a lot of value. And so one of those things is a decentralized stablecoin, which is one of those DeFi building blocks. So yeah, that's how I got started. And so I started probably working on xBacked in July last year, and left my full-time job in August to go full-time.
So you came into the Algorand ecosystem. What made you decide an over-collateralized stablecoin is what we need? Like, what made you go down that route as opposed to any other DeFi avenue?
Yeah, great point. So at the time, Tinyman wasn't even in testnet yet when I started building, but I knew like they were building a DEX. I knew folks finance at the time. There was like some blog posts and that sort of thing. And AlgoFi, when it was called AlgoBank, I think popped up early on.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some things happening. And at the time, no one was working on a decentralized stablecoin. So we're like, cool, let's chase that. And over time, that's obviously changed with AlgoFi's stable and with GARD, and a couple of others coming to market or building.
Really,
and
USD. There's also
the reason we went with
RUSD.
Yeah. And for us, like the over-collateralized model was tried and true, right, with several different protocols on Ethereum. So there was a lot we could learn from that. And there was a lot we could sort of adapt from different pieces to put our own twist on it. And at the time as well, like we didn't want to do anything too crazy, like an algorithmic stablecoin similar to UST, just because that model, like UST is the example of that working. There's a lot of others that have failed throughout the years.
Right.
So, yeah.
So now that you've been building since July, and you've seen STBL stable come out, GARD's coming out, does that worry you in any way? Do you think does it make your job more difficult? And like, how do you feel about that?
I think it makes my job more fun, really. Like, it's really good. Like back when we started building, there was not much happening at all. And now there's not just competitors, but also like a very vibrant ecosystem coming to life, right? So at that level, I think it's really, really exciting. I will say it definitely, like when GARD and AlgoHQ announced, it was like, all right, time to turn on the gas. But I don't think this game is won in weeks or months, like after releasing. I think it's won over years, and you need to be able to take a long-term view. So the fact we're releasing like 6 months or so after the stable, not a worry. The fact we're launching probably a month after GARD, I think their timeline is April, not concerning, right? Like this is just the beginning of a pretty long game that I'm very excited to be a part of.
I agree with that. It's definitely a long game. I mean, any company built on Algorand needs to be thinking at least a 1 year to 2 year timeline of like, where are you going to be at that time? And then past that, it's very difficult to predict, especially in crypto. It's really difficult to predict the next month, the next 6 months. But then like, we don't need to know exactly how we're going to get from destination A to B, but you need to know what B is. I think like that's really important. Mm-hmm. What do you think as a founder? Do you agree with that? Or do you think it's more important? Okay, here's the question. Do you think it's more important to decide the process of getting to a destination without knowing the destination, or to know the destination and not know the process of getting there?
That is a fantastic question. So I think there's a really good quote that sort of sums this up from a mentor of mine. And he talks about ready, fire, aim. Okay. And so the whole idea of building products is to iterate very quickly, because you don't know what the market actually wants until you start doing some tests, right? So you start here and you jump over here and you do a test and you go, okay, you need to readjust and go here. So my answer to your question is definitely it's more about the process and being driven by feedback from the community and being very iterative on how you're building your product. So yeah, I think definitely you need to have like the vision to sort of, at a macro sense, like, yeah, we're going to get here, but you're only going to get there by doing these small iterative cycles. And you're only going to know that that is the correct destination if you make those discoveries along the way. So yeah, that's how I like to think about product development and building.
In a macro sense, and you mentioned macro, so now it made me think of this. In a macro sense, when do you think the big inflection point or big reason to go to a purely on-chain stablecoin, like what do you think that reason will be, or like what could it be?
Excellent question. So I've actually been thinking about this recently. And so when you're talking, how macro are you talking? You're talking like the microcosm of Algorand, DeFi as a whole, or like when will my mum go, I'm going to transact using
the latter,
xUSD
your mom,
instead of, yeah, okay. Oh man, that's, I mean, to an extent, it's kind of happening with UST, right? So they have a very strong product market fit with e-commerce. And there's like, I think the last time I checked, it was like $300 million was using UST on e-commerce platforms in Korea. So I think when the DeFi rails are abstracted away, and Kane from Synthetics talks about this, right? Like there's tens of thousands of people in the entire world that actually care about the plumbing of the financial system. Everyone else just wants to send their money, buy their stuff, and they don't care.
Yeah. Sorry.
You're right. So I think the inflection point will come when DeFi payment rails are more efficient or more trusted than traditional payment rails. And I don't think at that time my mum is going to care like what xUSD is, where it comes from. I think she's just going to care about the efficiency it provides for their purchasing experience and whatever. So I think it's really interesting. I think it's pretty far away from that level of adoption, but we're starting to see sparks of it with UST and that sort of thing. So yeah, it'd be interesting. I think,
it's the kind of thing like it'll probably be abstracted beyond multiple layers before anyone who's not really interested in the financial plumbing of Web 2 or Web 3 cares or notices. Like if my mom, your mom are going to use a decentralized dollar, they probably won't know that it's a decentralized dollar. It'll just be that way. But I feel like we're still at least 5 years away from that even becoming like, for maybe like one bank or, okay, maybe this is maybe I'll look like an ass after this prediction, but I feel like crypto's still at least 5 years from like a multi-billion-dollar company saying we're going to use a decentralized stablecoin. Not saying that it's not a thing. It's just going to take so long to transfer the dollars in Web 2 to Web 3. And do you think like if you were in that position of like, let's say you ran PayPal, let's say you're like the CEO of PayPal, and then a guy named Austin from Australia comes to you and says, I have this thing, and you describe xUSD to him. What do you think is the difficulty of accepting that and saying, yeah, let's just do it? Like it's cheaper, it's more efficient, it's faster. We, like, you and I know that. Why won't they do it? Why do you think they won't do it?
Well, the immediate thing that jumps into my mind is risk, right? Like they would definitely be like, this is pretty risky because what happens if it depegs? What does insurance look like for this? Like there's all of that boring side of it. And then after that, like along with risks comes regulation. Like what does this look like for us? Not just in the US, but in all of the jurisdictions that we operate in, right? So I think that becomes a pretty difficult conversation for Austin to have with PayPal. But if there was something, something like a Stripe that can offer like a pretty compliant way. They take care of all the hassle, all the integrations, that sort of thing. And then they go, hey, if you want to transact in like all of these different cryptocurrencies and accept them as payment or that sort of thing, we'll handle all of that for you. So I think whatever product rolls up like that could be hugely successful at convincing traditional capital to come in. But yeah, it is a very, very big question. I think regulators need to give clear guidance in a way that doesn't stifle innovation and that sort of thing. I think that's very important, because what's happening with some of these dApps is pretty amazing, that it's even possible. So I think it's important that I'm really bullish on Australia's stance, actually, because this senator, he did this whole inquiry. He talked to a heap of different protocols, and he talked to like people that into NFTs and all sorts of stuff, and did this awesome report to the government. And it was like, we should probably change our policies to accommodate the innovation and stuff happening in this sector. And this is sort of something like a good middle ground or a good first step to take towards it. So I hope policymakers in other jurisdictions sort of look to that and go, okay, maybe we should figure out a like good and safe way to do this without damaging this industry.
So there's a lot of stablecoins. A lot of them are tied to $1. Is there room for all of these stablecoins, not just on Algorand, but like on every chain? You can't take everything into account. How can all these stablecoins that are worth $1 play with each other in like a kind way? Are they all gonna have breathing room? I mean, it seems like they can all have breathing room from a numbers standpoint, because I don't know how much of the monetary supply of dollars is in stablecoins, but I'm sure it's a tiny, tiny percentage. So there's clearly like a lot of room for everything to have space, but eventually you'd think they have to come together in like some type of aggregator. Is that like, do you think about that? And is that like something that you think would be difficult to get to bring Ethereum stablecoins and Luna stablecoins and Solana and Algorand and bring them somehow all together and get them all working on the same value? Like, is that feasible?
Yeah. So I'll be honest, I haven't thought about this too much, because I've just been laser focused like on the 6 months and getting to mainnet and getting V1 out.
Right.
But I do like, oh man, I did have a thought actually. And it's gone, because I have thought about it.
No pressure, take your time.
Yeah, that's right. So when I've been thinking about that 6 months, I've been very focused on what's happening in Algorand, like what like users are there for xUSD in Algorand, what competitors are there in Algorand. But at the same time, there's the more macro picture, which is like over in Ethereum, there's a bunch of competitors. Over in Terra, a bunch of competitors. In Solana, that sort of thing, right? And how do you compete? And what does that look like in the long term? Because in the short term, like Algorand right now is sort of closed off. There's no strong ERC20 bridge.
Right.
But once there is, and once, there's EVM compatible dApps, what does that look like for xUSD? What does that look like for all the OG stablecoins? Let's call them on Algorand.
Right.
So I think like the first step is figuring out what strong bridging looks like, and how we could bridge xUSD to other chains, and what the demand would be like, and what the integrations could look like. But I think to your question, like, would they all just get rolled up? Potentially. So Algo Mint is, I think, kind of talking about this idea of a wrapped USD coin. So they would have USDC, USDT, and that sort of thing. And then they'd have a basket of like xUSD stable and that sort of thing, DAI, if they bridge it across. And I think wrapping it up like that makes a lot of sense, because that token would have massive amounts of liquidity, and it'd be huge.
Right.
So yeah, I think, but then the other side is, maybe we don't win, and maybe DAI has reached escape velocity. Maybe MIM has. I don't know. Maybe UST has. So they're like the big ones that have the billions in TVL. But again, they're only a couple of years old. Like MIM, not even a year old, barely a year old.
You ask
So it's
someone
still
outside of the
pretty
crypto
early.
space, sorry to interrupt you. You ask someone outside of the crypto space
Yeah.
what's a stable coin, they don't know what a stable coin is. So I don't think anything has reached escape velocity. Like
Yeah.
that's just a fact. Like I'm pretty sure people who are not in this world, you think a stable coin sounds like a pretty simple concept. Like you could, to me, but I'm familiar with it now. But like there was a time when I didn't know and I was like, oh my God, a coin that can be $1. It sounds so simple, and it is. In theory, it's simple. In execution, it's not simple. What's stopping someone from, if you say UST on the Terra network is the best stablecoin or best algorithmic stablecoin out right now, specifically algorithmic, what's stopping you or anyone from just literally taking the exact same math and just putting it on Algorand? Is that like a thing? Is that possible?
I'm sure it's possible. For me personally, like, why just fork and copy it? Like, you don't move the needle, you don't do anything special. And, if you do that, the guys that built UST are going to come up with the next thing, and you're not going to come up with the next thing, right? You're just copying. So
Right.
I don't think, I mean, it's definitely possible and there could be some success, but I think eventually the true innovators would win because, to be frank, you're not an innovator if you're just forking the project like line for line. Like, doesn't make sense, right?
I mean, true. Go ahead.
Yeah. But I do think, yeah, I don't know. I don't think I've got anything to add to that. You go.
Yeah, well, it's like, I mean, I'm speaking in theoreticals because I know in execution it'd be so much more difficult to take something from a completely different blockchain ecosystem and just like they're different virtual machines, different execution mechanisms and computational mechanisms. So it's not really possible. But well, okay, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but
Yeah.
I think it would be hard. So
Yeah.
you're talking about innovation. The concept of an over-collateralized stablecoin is not new. So what makes xUSD like innovative? What makes it?
Gotcha, yeah.
What's the killer feature of it?
Definitely. So there's a few different things that differentiate us in Algorand and also elsewhere. So we did start originally, we were looking at DAI's architecture diagrams. We were like, all right, this makes a lot of sense. Let's do this. But then like we really thought about it, and Algorand, like DAI was designed under a set of constraints, right? Being the EVM. And we're on the AVM. So I was like, cool, what can we actually do? What's different? And so a piece of this is having a very low collateral ratio, which on its own isn't a killer feature, but it is just like a more unique thing among over collateralized stablecoins. But for us, what we did is we've got a redemptions feature within the protocol. Right? This is something Maker does not have. They kind of have this way where you can swap USDC for DAI and vice versa, and that was quite divisive in their community. But on xBacked, if xUSD is trading below the target of $1, you can actually buy some off DEX, come to the protocol and say, hey, I want to redeem 5 xUSD tokens for $5 of underlying collateral. So that creates a floor to the price, and it allows you, first of all, it adds buying pressure on the DEX, and then allows people to profit off the arbitrage. So that's like one lever, so this redemptions mechanism. And then the other lever, which isn't revolutionary, but it's like a stability fee that you can use to control the supply and demand of xUSD minting and that sort of thing.
Okay.
So I think those two levers together are pretty strong. And then I think the one thing we'd look at adding over time is more usage of the treasury. So there's this protocol on Terra called Mars. I think it's Mars. And they have a really, really cool like structure with their protocol and their stablecoin that introduces a lot of their treasury as that redemption mechanism. So I think looking at that in the future could be pretty interesting as well. Yeah, so killer feature right now is redemption. And also the killer feature is our like relentless focus on building a stablecoin. Like that's all we're building. We're just focused on building the best stablecoin, decentralized stablecoin on Algorand. And focused on making sure collateral is of a really high quality. And also focusing on the user experience, right? And part of the user experience is the stability of the token.
Agreed.
So we think about that as like a feature, right? Not just like something that's taken for granted. It's something that we really focus on.
Yeah. Agreed. You saw when AlgoHQ launched, they were the first dollar well, one of the first, maybe not the exact first, but one of the first dollar stablecoins on Algorand. Tough for them to keep that at $1. Like they did a lot of stuff to try to keep that at $1 in the first few weeks. And, they did, but it still does drift below. And at any time you can technically buy stable with USDC, sorry, and just bring it back to AlgoHQ and it'll be worth $1 even if you bought it for 95 cents 10 seconds before. When xBacked launches, you will have more dollar stablecoins on Algorand to help balance everything out. But what strategies are you thinking of to make sure, like from day one, it stays at $1 or within 1 cent? Or what's your threshold actually? Is it 1 cent, 2 cents, 3 cents for like hit the red button?
Yeah. So the threshold we had listed in the light paper a while ago was like just to begin with plus or minus 2%. Right. I think keeping within that threshold at launch, given the total TVL of Algorand, would be pretty good. Like I would be pretty happy with that. And then over time, we just reduce that as we dial it in and as liquidity grows for the ecosystem. So I think a really important thing for us is to make sure that there's no selling pressure for XUSD, or not no selling pressure, but what could happen with xUSD if there was nothing to do with it? You come, you mint it, and then you go, cool, I'm going to trade it all into DeFi because I just want to leverage myself on that. And so this selling pressure of xUSD like breaks down the peg. Or maybe you go, hey, I'm going to go get xUSD, then I'm going to swap it into USDC, and then I'm going to supply that on AlgoHQ or Folks or something like that, right? So thinking about the adoption of xUSD, because I think adoption brings stability. It's all well and good to have this like magical protocol, over-collateralized, all of that. But really, it's up to the use case for the stablecoin on whether it stays stable. If there's a reason to hold it and a reason to transact with it, that is going to help the peg more than any magical arbitrage, right?
Right. That leads me to a question, actually, that I want to ask you. What partnerships or dApps, protocols, programs, products, whatever you want to call it, are you thinking of integrating xUSD with in those first few weeks or months or whatever to make sure that there's something that people in the Algorand ecosystem can borrow xUSD and they don't necessarily need to trade it into something else? They can go use it, maybe an NFT marketplace, maybe some, what are you thinking about that?
Definitely. So I think the like biggest partnership for us right now is Folks Finance. So just today, actually, they opened up an xUSD pool in testnet. So you can actually go and mint xUSD on testnet in xBacked and then go over to Folks and supply that. And so that's so people can start building bots and all sorts of stuff to prepare for that partnership into mainnet. Right. Outside of that, we're talking to Prismatic. So Prismatic is pretty cool. They're building out like a DAO treasury management solution. So we're in talks with them about what that might look like. There's nothing super solid there, but I think being integrated to DAO treasuries is quite good. We've been talking to, I've been talking to John a little bit from AlgoHQ about their, stable swaps and potentially looking at incentivizing a stable xUSD pool and that sort of thing. So we'll see what that looks like. For marketplaces, I think it's so interesting because I think it's a very easy solution, to reach for when you're asked, what can I do with your stablecoin? You can buy NFTs. And I think the NFT community on Algorand is super vibrant. And I think there's definitely a use case there. But at the same time, it doesn't differentiate us from Stable or GARD. They could go to the NFT marketplace, and the NFT marketplace, they will have no loyalty to xUSD. They'll only care that from their community, there is demand for xUSD being accepted, right? I think the exception for this would be XA, because people can sort of create their own baskets and choose their own like form of payment and that sort of thing. So
Right.
xUSD doesn't have to be listed on XA. So marketplaces, like, it's part of the strategy, but I think it's not something that would meaningfully differentiate xUSD. And so that's what we'll be looking for in mainnet.
What about centralized exchanges? That's probably going to be, if whichever Algorand stablecoin can get on a centralized exchange first, will have massive, massive opportunity, because there's only a handful of centralized exchanges that you can get USDCA from and onto. Maybe like, I don't know, probably I can count them on one hand. And a lot of them are, not the most secure, maybe not the safest or the best exchanges, even though they do a lot of volume. Do you think that getting xUSD on a centralized exchange is possible? I'm sure it's possible, but do you think you can do it? Do you think is that something you're thinking about? What do you think about that?
I think the problem of getting on ramps to Algorand is something we need to fix as like an ecosystem community ASAP. Like, USDCA should be able to be purchased on Coinbase, right? That would just explode. When it comes to decentralized stablecoin on centralized exchanges, I'm not sure any centralized exchange has one listed. So I know, I'm thinking of MIM here from the Abracadabra protocol. So they had their spell token listed on Coinbase, but not their stablecoin. And my theory is the regulations and that sort of thing for listing a decentralized stablecoin are probably different to just like a normal token. That's my gut feeling. So I don't actually know.
You might be right. Yeah, I don't know, but that sounds like it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It would be massively bullish if you were a decentralized stablecoin on an exchange, because it does become a very good on ramp. But it means, right, right now at least, we, like, if let's say it's xUSD that's getting listed, we need to have better partnerships or more buy-in from better exchanges than Circle does right now with USDCA, which is not impossible. And I think the recent investment in folks from Coinbase, I think that's definitely a good signal for the Algorand ecosystem. Because if Coinbase can start listing some high quality ASAs, that would be very good.
So besides US dollars, Go Bitcoin, and Go ETH, what other, in a dream world, what other assets would you like to support on xBacked?
Yeah. So something that's crucial. So everyone knows about GARD and how GARD will like unlock your governance stack. And I think other products are going to come to market that allow you to unlock your governance stack, but in the form of a yield token or a wrapped algo token, that probably gives you a little bit more flexibility. You can go and you can trade it. You can go and provide it as collateral and that sort of thing. So
right,
I think
you wouldn't get liquidated on that per se.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's interesting because it's a yield bearing token. You can like factor in all sorts of math around, the price, or the true price, I guess. Because when you then redeem that for the rewards from governance, it's worth more.
Right.
So I think in a dream world, having a product like that online, it would be a super strong addition to the xBacked collateral assets. After that, I think we'd really have to see some like strong ASAs come to market for it to make sense. So when I think of a strong ASA, it's got deep liquidity, right? So during liquidations and that sort of thing, it's not just people aren't going to get shortchanged on dexes and that sort of thing. It's backed by a product or a community or something. Like there's a real use case, there's real demand. It's not just something people are trading for fun or
Right.
in expectation of.
Mm-hmm.
And it also needs to have along with that, like a good team behind it as well.
Right.
And over time, like the decentralization topic for collateral is interesting. So, for example, should xBacked allow USDC as a collateral type? Right? What risks does that open users up to, the protocol up to?
Mm-hmm.
Should xBacked allow assets with clawback and freeze as collateral? Or is that just a blanket no? Because it could lead to a huge rug pull and it'd be terrible, right? So there's definitely some considerations there. And eventually these decisions would be handed over to the community. And that would be done at a point where, the community is educated on what makes sense. In the early days, it doesn't make sense to overturn those types of decisions to the community because they will end up not betting, but they will end up voting on community favorites, which might not be high quality tokens.
Right.
And that's bad for the protocol.
Right.
So it's sort of the core contributor's job in the beginning to set the protocol up for a successful transition to decentralized governance.
Right. And that's sets me up for a great segue into the question I was going to ask you about decentralization and how you're going to bring xBacked from what it is right now to a fully decentralized DAO. And no one's lying to themselves and saying that, especially on Algorand, like the projects, they can't be decentralized yet. It's not responsible. You can't just put something out and then just walk away and be like, well, I'm just going to let the whole thing handle itself now. We saw that recently with the meme coin Akita, and that came from nothing. And then a community, I'm sure people watching this know, but community sprouted up around it. Random people came in, said they were going to be the devs, couldn't handle it. The whole thing is a dumpster fire at this point. So clearly just starting something, walking away and hoping the community steps up is not fair because you can't expect people to drop what they're doing. What's the process going to be for the distribution of the governance token to ensure that xBacked gets to a point in which the community can vote and have a significant voice, if not a majority voice? Do you have like a timeline on when you want to achieve that by? And how are you going to distribute those tokens? Like, what's the mechanism of distributing those tokens?
Excellent topic of discussion. So I think the journey takes years. So Maker, they went fully decentralized, dissolved their Maker Foundation, that sort of thing, last year. And they have I would say that Maker and Synthetics are the most mature DAOs in terms of governance and in terms of team structure. So Maker has
Compound also decentralize?
Yeah, definitely. I'm just more familiar with Maker.
Yeah, go on. Sorry to interrupt.
They've done. No, that's right. I think, Compound's interesting because they have like vote delegation and stuff, and we'll get into that as well. It's a good topic. Sure. But Maker and Synthetics, like Maker has all these different pods that focus on different aspects of the protocol. So some people are focusing on growing, marketing, content, other people deving the front end, other people the contracts, other people like risk, that sort of thing. Synthetics has like this council that's community elected, and that helps to centralize decision making a little bit, right? So you saw this with Sushi a little bit last year, where the CTO was, I don't know if he was kicked out or if he left, but basically he made a post and it was like, it's super hard to build a product when you're trying to decentralize, right? And Kane from Synthetics has spoken about this as well. product teams need leadership, and you can't expect governance of a protocol to lead a product team. That's not feasible. So leadership still needs to exist within a DAO, but the decision-making process is decentralized. So for xBacked, we'll have potentially over 51%, if not at least 51% of our governance tokens going to the community. And the emission schedule for that will sort of go on over 3 years. There's some really good firms out there that do the math on the distribution, and they make sure at a certain point, that decision-making power is overturned from core team and investors to the community. And the idea is it should be a couple of years down the track when the core protocol is solid and stable and working, and the community is highly engaged in that protocol. And they also understand there's people within the community that are experts in the protocol and know what makes sense. And so that leads into delegating governance tokens and the decision-making power to those community members, which I think is pretty interesting. And I think it makes a lot of sense because, you might be time poor, you might be an investor invested in 30 different projects, and you're like, yep, I don't actually know what's going on with xBacked these days. I'd rather delegate my voting power to the DAO, like to the multi-sig, instead of, having to keep up because I trust the team and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's a really interesting topic. And I think any project that has less than that 51% token allocation to the community, is a red flag. It just won't ever be completely decentralized and turned over to the community.
Right. I saw on your website that it's 53% currently. That's going to community, but also under that same umbrella of the 53% was marketing. So do you count marketing budget over the next 3 years as part of a community distribution? Because I assume that those tokens won't go into the smart contract for distribution. You'll just a year down the line, you want to break into the ETH ecosystem, you hit up an ETH influencer, hey, can you use our stuff, make a video, and then I'll give you X amount. Do you think that helps decentralization or hurts it?
It's a great question. So I think giveaways like that need to be done super carefully, especially in terms of the percentage of tokens. So there's 100 million X governance tokens. That's all that'll ever exist. So if we gave someone 1 million, that's a lot of decision-making power. Yeah. So I think that definitely needs to be taken into consideration. With that 53% going towards growth, it would also be incentive programs. So liquidity mining incentives for xBacked, or partnering with another project in the ecosystem to provide staking rewards and incentives over there to drive that partnership and the usage of xUSD. So yeah, it's something honestly, we'll be figuring out as we go, because like you said, we don't know what's going to be possible in 6 months, right? We can make some pretty good decisions now based on what's happened previously, right? But going into the future, there could be some really unique ways of leveraging that 53% to grow the protocol and distribute to the community. Yeah.
I think because Algorand is constantly updating and upgrading, that's one thing I think is really fascinating about it. And, the change just went from Algorand Virtual Machine 1.0 to 1.1. I heard from pretty much everybody's a developer that's a big needed update, so where are we going to be by 1.5, 2? It's things could really get a whole lot more complex and more in depth, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Will there be delegated voting in the xBacked DAO? There will be.
Yeah, I think at some point, definitely. It's actually pretty interesting. It might be sooner than I was even expecting, because I was talking to the NFD team, the non-fungible domains. Their product is awesome. So everyone keep an eye out for that. And as
I'm sure
part
they
of
all
that, some of
are.
the function,
I'm sure they all are.
some of the functionality they've got would enable fairly easily delegation of voting, which I think is super interesting
Mm.
in the short term to delegate votes. In the longer term, it would have to be like done on chain, but yeah.
Do you think it would be useful for a delegation mechanism that the delegator has to redelegate every period or every other period or something? Because, you know, what we want to avoid is basically having on-chain politicians which can keep their constituents vote for a long time. And then therefore in America, we have this, I don't know if you guys have a system like this in Australia, but senator or a representative can be in their position for decades and decades and decades. And like, as long as they keep winning the vote, they just will keep doing it. And then a lot of the people, if this person was voted into office 40 years ago, the children of the maybe even the grandchildren at this point, like they're not really going to know. They're just, oh, a lot of the time people say, oh, he's already in office, like my life is fine, I'll just keep voting for that person. So do you think that's to avoid locked in or like mucked up, bogged up, clogged political systems on chain? Do you think it's necessary to have people constantly be thinking about who they delegate to, or do you think it's okay to have just, all right, I trust you, I trust the DAO, the multi-sig, I'm just going to delegate to the DAO, and you know, they don't need to check it ever again?
Yeah. I think you should give consumers the option, or you sort of not do a similar thing to what the foundation does with governance, but you can sort of go like, hey, like, you just want to participate in governance? Do you just want to vote with the DAO? Or do you just want to vote with this person? Do you trust this person? If yes, for what period of time? The next like 3 proposals, 6? Do you want to do it just for the next 6 months and whatever happens, right? And with that lockup, can you then opt out if you're like, well, there's the proposal that I actually want to have a say on, regardless of what this delegate thinks,
Right.
So I think giving people a choice makes sense. Unfortunately, I do believe a lot of the community would probably be more apathetic and just be like, look, I just want to assign my delegates. They make the decisions. I'm not going to keep up to date, sort of thing. And that becomes a big problem when their delegate like goes rogue or is like, I'm done with DeFi, or, you know, whatever.
Right.
And they don't get that message. And then there's like a bunch of things over here. So it would make sense to have a maximum delegate time. So eventually the power's unlocked, but yeah.
Or maybe you need to get reelected like after a year or something. I don't know, whatever you think of. Yeah. What if someone has a big stake? Like, let's say you have a big, or let's say I have a big stake of X, and people delegate to me. And then like a few years down the line, I'm like, all right, well, I want to go buy a house. So I like sell 99% of my X and I leave like 2 tokens. Like, what if people are still delegated to me? Like, I mean, these are kind of random questions, but do you think like, to delegate to someone, you have to trust them a good amount. And so how can you create trust, especially if that person you're delegating to is anonymous? Like, they might just be a Discord handle and they have good opinions in the Discord, and you're like, well, I'm gonna delegate to this dude because he makes good points in the Discord. This dude might rug your delegation and he might vote, like, you know. So what do you think about that? I don't know.
I think the best way to protect against that is when you delegate, you only delegate the decision-making power and the voting power of your tokens. You don't actually send it to them. And now that does get interesting, because what happens if you sell your tokens and you've delegated X amount over here, right? Like, that does get very tricky. So it would have to, like, something like that would have to be done on chain in a smart contract to make sure everything's like in sync. But yeah, I think that is really interesting. I think the best answer is just like, don't hand over your actual tokens to a delegate.
Yeah.
unless like you really trust them.
But I'm sure no one
Because
would
then
do
they
that though, right? Like that's not how the system would be set up. It wouldn't be like I send you my actual funds and then I trust you to. It's a
yeah.
smart contract. I guess maybe you could do a min balance thing. Like once the person gets elected, they have to maintain a balance. Um,
Mm, that'd be cool.
Kind of like governance, Algorand governance right now. You know, if I have 100,000 X and I need to, and I get elected with 100,000 X, that I need to maintain 100,000 X or something like that.
Yeah.
So I want to move on just a little because I want to ask you about the vaults. So can you explain this
Yeah.
concept of like what is the vault compared
Yeah.
to, you know, another lending protocol? Let's say like stable on AlgoFi. There's no vault,
Mhm.
but there is an interest rate, whereas xUSD will not have like rolling interest. You know, it's just a minting and burn fee. Is that correct?
No, so we've made the decision to add that ongoing rate
Okay.
as one of those levers to help control the supply and demand of xUSD, right? For a long time, we were like, no, it's just going to be a minting fee, all good. But after thinking about it and the limited TVL in Algorand, it's like, it makes sense that we have redemptions and this ongoing rate. So that's coming to testnet this afternoon, actually. I'm going
Okay.
to set that live.
Awesome. Might
But
want to
the
update the website.
I know, yeah. The main difference between our protocol and AlgoFi is we are using isolated vaults. So on AlgoFi, you can supply like a bit of USDC, and then you can borrow all sorts of different assets, right?
Mm-hmm.
With that, and it's just all encompassed in one position, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if one asset goes crazy, gets rugged, crazy volatile relative to everything else, you could still get liquidated.
Right.
With xBacked, each vault is its own smart contract and its own position.
Gotcha.
Right. So you could have the Algo xUSD vault, and that's a separate position to your goBTC xUSD vault,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they'll get liquidated at different times. So it's an easier way, I would say, to manage your risk. And then on our side, it also allows us to experiment pretty quickly with different collateral types, because we could be like, cool, let's just test the demand for yieldly or something like that, right? Let's see what this looks like. We're only gonna we'll set the limit of xUSD pretty low. Let's just see what happens. Let's see what liquidations look like, that sort of thing. Whereas I think for AlgoFi, it's a little bit more onerous to add in an asset because they have to think of how it'll affect the entire basket that they have. Whereas for us, it's like its own isolated vault.
And isn't there something on isn't there something like on Algorand just in the base code that you can't have too many assets connected to one lending protocol at a time? I'm not really sure, but I heard about this when I was part of the AlgoFi team. I was like, why don't we just add everything and like, you know, just let people go crazy? And they're like, well, we can only have 10 assets like in total. Maybe that's changed or updated, but what do you know what I'm talking about? And maybe I'm just talking bullshit, but like, am I actually on?
So yeah, definitely. So this is a problem because an account on Algorand can only create 10 smart contracts at a time, right? So if you had a multi-sig or you had an admin account that you were using to deploy the different applications, you would cap out at 10. And I believe the AlgoFi architecture like requires all of them included in one transaction or something like that. So that would be a problem there. For us, we could expand to that limit of 10, which is I don't know if it's going up with this release of the AVM or next, but they definitely know it's a pain point. But
they want to upgrade it to unlimited, right?
Yeah. And especially the amount of assets you can opt into. So that at the moment is 1,000.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to go way up. I think that is unlimited as of AVM 1.1.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's, I I kind of lost the train of thought there.
Well,
But yeah, I
I
think
want to
that's like
ask you
yeah.
about how will the liquidations work? Do you
Mm.
need coding experience to do liquidations, or will there be a front end? Um,
Mhm.
is there a minimum balance to liquidate? What percentage of someone's collateral can you liquidate, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. So at the moment in testnet, there is liquidations UI. Um, so in mainnet, it is possible to liquidate via the UI. Will you beat the bots people have built? Maybe not.
Mm,
But what we are doing is we'll have our vault contracts, and then we'll also have xUSD staking contracts. And what this will allow people to do is stake xUSD that liquidators can then use when liquidating, right? So it's kind of like a permissioned flash loan for liquidators.
mm-hmm.
And so I don't have that much capital. Maybe someone staked 100K xUSD and I build a bot and I go, cool, I'm going to use this person's staked xUSD
Mm-hmm.
to liquidate 50K worth of algo over here.
Yeah.
What's going to happen in that scenario is the staker receives the majority of the collateral at the discount. And then I, for calling the liquidation, receive just a small 0.5% of that liquidation. So it ends up being quite lucrative for liquidators and for those who don't have coding experience that do want to participate in liquidations.
Right.
So that's the idea there.
Okay. Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really important to give people the option to liquidate. I saw on your website there's a discrepancy in info compared to your docs. So in your docs it says the minimum vault opening is $100, but in your website it says 1,000.
Yep.
So
Yep. Man, we got to update that website.
So is it $100 or
yeah.
1,000?
Yeah, for mainnet it'll be 100. So originally it was 1,000, but now it's going to be 100.
So it's basically like you need $100 to open an account.
Yeah.
And why? Why did you put this barrier in there?
There's a few different reasons, but I think the biggest one is it kind of acts as DDoS protection in a way. Because without this limit, someone could go and basically DDoS xBacked, create thousands and thousands of vaults quite cheaply with like a very minimal amount of collateral. And what that would mean is liquidations slow down. It means because retrieving all of the account data for the vault would just be clogged up with crap. Right. So it's a very adversarial attack vector. And so if someone wants to do that, we at least need to make it expensive for them. Because then to open a few thousand vaults, you're spending like locking up a decent amount of money.
Right.
And in that case, like we're okay with that. So cool, bring the TVL, whatever. Like, but if someone was just creating a very minimal vault, it just becomes really annoying for liquidators.
Okay. Yeah, that does make sense because I know that you probably have to parse through accounts over, I believe it's under 110% collateralization. What about different currencies like euros or rubles or pesos or pounds or something like that?
And collect that. And then you've got another sort of oracle problem, which is how would you support a collection, right? So for us and our architecture right now, it would be impossible for us to support an entire collection. Say this is the Algorand vault, right? And then we're going to price each Goanna ASA ID based on its price over here or last traded at price. The only way we could do it is just using the floor price, which means some people get screwed like that have really valuable Algorannas. And then other people like closer to the floor price get a better deal.
Right.
So I think if there's like a very good solution to the pricing of NFTs, it's something worth investigating, especially with our architecture. Like we could do an experiment and be like, all right, we're going to give it a go. Right now, the most feasible would be like this single Goanna will open up a vault for that because the owner is very convincing and is accepting to, you know, a higher interest rate and that sort of thing.
Okay.
And it makes sense for us to just try it.
You'd think that
so that's
NFT
kind of-
loans would be super high interest, right? Like they would have to be because it's such a volatile thing. I mean, I always suggest to people, why not try a 14-day rolling average price, you know, or like 14-day median price instead of floor, because there's always going to be bad ones on the floor, you know. It's like, but then you could probably do like an average price. But again, if that average price goes down, it is crazy. I wonder if there's something that could be like the marketplace, Rand Gallery. If you partnered with a marketplace, and let's say it was Rand Gallery, you got them to provide, like, they'll buy the debt basically. Like, so if someone defaults on that NFT portfolio, the marketplace will buy it back, and then they'll provide the liquidity to distribute amongst the liquidators, and then the marketplace will get a deal on those NFTs and like relist them. I don't know.
That's pretty good. That's very good.
Could be
I
useful.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please do it. I mean, like, it would be fire. But like, you know, let's get it going. So so 20, as we start to like wrap it up, 2022 for Algorand, new Algo Foundation CEO Stacey Warden coming out and saying that marketing PR is like going to be one of her biggest fronts that she really like tries to go all out on. They really want to grow Algorand this year.
Yeah.
Do you think Algorand can grow this year? I'm sure you do. What do you think will be the catalyst for Algorand to grow? It's a really hard question because we probably don't know. It's probably going to be something we don't expect. But just speculating, what do you think could be that catalyst that brings Algorand to back into the top 20, top 15 market cap cryptocurrencies, or something like that?
Definitely. So I think fundamentally the activity in the ecosystem and the projects coming to Algorand like provide real value and real utility, right? So finally the ecosystem will come alive. Last year there was Tinyman, there was AlgoMint, and towards the end of the year AlgoFi.
And
this
Yieldly.
year it's going to and Yieldly. Yeah, don't forget the OG.
Right.
And also Xfinite.
And NFTs.
Like,
and NFTs.
platform. Yeah. Like
So we had some
happening.
stuff. Like there was some stuff, but I agree. I'll let you keep going, but I definitely agree that it was like there was stuff there, but it felt really sparse, not polished. You're kind of pulling things together. You have to do a lot of research on Twitter and Reddit and blah 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 to find out how things work. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, to answer the question, I think a better wallet UX in the browser would be huge. Like my algo, I think is good, but people coming over from other ecosystems, it's just like, what the hell? And it's also like a little bit antiquated. If you look at something like Phantom on Solana, why can't we have all of these beautiful integrations ready to go? So I think that's up there, improve the UX of dApps via better wallets. Then after that, I think bridging, super important, right? Like open up the floodgates, get people from other ecosystems in here using all of the great dApps built on Algorand. And I think though, like top two would be that. And then I think
good ones.
Maybe more strategic foundation grants. I don't know. I think last year they were maybe a little bit too loose with it. Like there's been several tweets I've seen now where people are like, okay, this project got a foundation grant and rugged. What the hell, right? So that's the other thing. Yeah. So like foundation grants, I think under Stacey will get way better. But I think on top of that is premium blue chip ASAs getting launched, right? So AlgoMint is doing their token sale. I think it's later this month.
March 30th.
So that, brilliant. So that's like blue chip, solid team, solid product. That's great. That's awesome, right? The tokenomics are well thought out. That's, number one. Later in the year, you've got our governance token, which I think is pretty good. You've got Bank coming to market. You've got Folks and their token.
I'm sure all the
you've got Gain from
platforms
GARD,
will
right?
have. All the platforms.
Exactly.
Like there's going to be like how many new dApps launching this year? 20, 30 probably. They're probably all going to have a token. I think out of that batch, at least a handful have to like become solid, right? Like you would have to think. But the question is which? It's like one thing I find so interesting right now in the Algorand ecosystem is like there's certain, I made a thread like a few days ago, and like this is one thing I said in it is like a certain corners of the ring are like really heavily contested right now, and one of those is like DeFi suites. I feel like there's like 10 companies making DeFi suites.
Yeah,
Humble too. We forgot about Humble, Prismatic, Vertex. I mean, there's definitely 5 off the top of my head I'm not thinking of right now. It's going to be a really, really dynamic year, and I think like it's going to start to feel like the bar is just getting really crowded. Like, you know, at first the bar was empty and there's 3 people having a drink. Now it's going to be like, it's like, you know, Saturday night on spring break, like that kind of thing. Like it's really, I'm excited for it, but there were, you know, sometimes it's really hard to launch a token. It's really hard to get the utility and the dynamics right. We saw some companies, they've had a tough time with it so far. Opulus, Yieldly had roadblocks and stumbling points. You know, I don't discredit them. Like I know it's hard. So where am I going with this? I guess it's just like it's gonna be an interesting year.
Definitely. And I think your tweet the other day around like positive criticism and constructive criticism of projects, I think that's super important because, like you said, like at the start when the bar was starting filling, everyone's like buddy, like having a good time. And now it's just like you're going to be fighting over the pool table, seat at the table, seat at the bar, get a drink, all of that sort of stuff. And I think it's important to, you know, praise the good projects and those that have strong tokenomics and strong teams, and then sort of question like, oh, this team of anons, well, maybe not necessarily anons, but this team of people, like it doesn't quite add up with what you're building and what you're saying.
Right.
I really like that tweet. That was a good tweet.
Appreciate it. Yeah, coming into the Algorand ecosystem, and I've been like, I was monitoring it and like watching it since summer 2020, and then like I started AlgoHQ in summer 2021 or like late spring 2021. So I've really been like tapped in. The reason I made that thread was just because it's like, and same thing with the foundation grants. You made a great point there. They were really giving like money to anybody, and it was like, I think they had to. It was just buckshot strategy. Like, we don't know what we need. We don't know what the best app on this is going to be. We don't know what's going to catch. Throw a few $100K at everything we can find. Because I think they were so desperate for things to come in here over like in 2020. Because I don't even think they had smart contracts until like late 2020. Because they had them, but they didn't have the virtual machine. So I think it was way, way, way harder to build smart contracts. And like respect to Yieldly, because they actually made some smart contracts before AVM 1, even AVM 0.9. But I just think like foundation strategy, throwing money at everything, us as the community, just, okay, you're here, you're making something, we like the coin, we like the blockchain, like go ahead, build. Like, but now it is getting more crowded. It's only going to get more crowded. Even the good teams with great teams, great tokenomics, you know, I think it's important we don't start worshiping people, like, because these are just humans. Like, they're human beings.
Oh yeah,
they're not perfect. And once you start worshiping a team or worshiping a coin or something, if anything goes wrong, it's like a catastrophe for your entire world. And then that's why people get mad, and it's upsetting to see. So I think like we're gonna grow. Like, the community has to grow. If the ecosystem grows, the community has to grow. There's going to be a lot of like degens and trolls that come in and like fill up the corners because you need them too. I think it's going to be a really, really cool year. I definitely think you guys are going to have a big part to play in it too, for sure.
Yeah, man. I'm just super excited for the ride, really. Like, I think it's going to be a really, really good time for everyone involved here. So yeah.
It's going to be crazy though. I mean, that's crypto. That's why I like crypto. It's so like every day it's dynamic. It doesn't feel the same ever. It's like there's always something going on. Well, anyway, it's not going to keep you too long. It's been really, really great having you here on AlgoHQ. Austin, thank you so much xBacked. Anything else you want to tell people before we log off? Any closing words? Anything I missed? Anything you really want to get out there?
I don't think so. Like, our audits are kicking off this month. So expect mainnet in May, early June.
Awesome.
And get excited for that. And hop in the Discord, be a part of the community. Yeah. No, I appreciate your time. It's been a really good conversation.
You too, man. Thank you so much.